do 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 do. Do 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 do. Hello there. When last we spoke, I had to get a dental procedure done, and it sure did happen. I have to do that a few more times, so unfortunately, I am going to be gone for other sections of streaming. But for those of you following along with the framework streams, fortunately, it was on Friday, so I had a lot of time to recover. I'm good to go for this stream as usual today. Couple of announcements. The first one is that there is supposed to be a Warframe update coming soon. When that happens, the week that drops, I will not be doing framework. I'm not going to try to keep doing these live streams and try to get people to focus on something that isn't the new shiny thing that just came out. That's just stupid. Like, that obviously won't work. There's no reason we shouldn't just take a week off. I'll probably still stream Warframe, mind you, but I won't be streaming framework live streams. We'll just be playing Warframe. How novel. So just you can expect going forward, when there is a Warframe update, I will either not stream Warframe or I will not try to accomplish anything in Warframe, because one, people are just going to be extracted from their attention span, distracted from what we're talking about, and two, Warframe's updates are, I'm sorry to say it, reliably broken and buggy. There will be lots of hotfixes at the least. The game will be broken in some ways at most, so I will not be a lot of the time playing the new update, and I will also frequently not be even streaming because it will just be really broken. But we'll give it a try, because it's not like I don't want to stream or play Warframe those days, but Warframe's updates are not a good time to play Warframe most of the time. I've been paid to play Warframe during an update before, which I've told you when it's happened once before. But yeah, I think that's rightly so, because it is effectively beta testing the update, which that is worth money. I'm a professional, and that is a job that people are paid money for. So anyway, right, so you can expect we're not doing framework next week. Chroma. Now, Chroma, we're going to have a bit of an intro block here, because Chroma is not, how you say, a Warframe that... I'm trying to choose my words carefully here, but you know where I'm going with this. Like, there isn't, like, actually that much to say about Chroma. Chroma is, on the surface, a Warframe that, everybody kind of has an idea of, not everybody, of what would be powerful on Chroma, and it's not much benefit to spend a lot of time going on about what would be like so good on Chroma, right? This is just the Warframe that has been very popular for a very long time, and rightly so. It's very powerful second and third abilities. They're very straightforward. They're pretty much just passive buffs, but they're like good, so there's not a lot to say about those things, but I think that it's really interesting to dig into the nitty-gritty of like why we tend to build certain things certain ways, and that can often lead to interesting, sometimes not as obvious build decisions. That can be cool. That can be fun. So I do think that discussing Chroma will be fun, interesting. I do think there's value to doing that here. I'm aware that a lot of you who watch this series are not interested in what you consider to be like the meta or normal builds. And that is not something I care about. I care about your interests, but I don't care about whether something is popular or not. I care about examining the logic behind the thing and building it for what it is. I don't like the way other people present this information, and I don't think that all of their suppositions are warranted. So that's why I'm interested in discussing frames like this. I hope that makes sense. I have a feeling you might be as well. I feel there's just a bit of a stigma about frames like Chroma, like it can't be interesting or it's not cool to be interested in it because it is popular or considered to be good. I do not care about that. If you care about that, that's fine. I really don't. So you will see me give no pause except what I just did when we cover frames that are like, we're going to get to Mesa, and it's like, but what is there to say? Like, I personally don't feel that way. I know you do, but I thought I would just acknowledge it here, and then that's it. So does that make sense? Now, that being said, while I tell everybody that we're here, we are going to begin the stream today by doing something a little different, because I do sort of feel like Chroma requires a an additional curveball of sorts to hold people's interest, including mine. Okay, all right. I'm not immune to this either. All right. There's a degree to which it's not the frame I'm the most excited to discuss. Okay. Which means we're going to take a brief detour and have a delicious cup of coffee. So I'm going to make some with you. And during this stream today, we're going to have a little interlude that is the Chroma has a delicious cup of coffee. Toxin, the element my Chroma is representing here, is after all acidic related, and coffee, the delicious acid of my light roasted coffee. Yeah, that's totally not a stretch. So right, we're going to make some coffee together. Then we're going to drink it, and then we're going to make a Chroma build. So, the first few minutes of these, like I put timestamps on these when they go up on YouTube, and this is an example of when that's very useful. Not just because I'm going to stop the stream and make a cup of coffee, but like we can't immediately start the discussion. People don't have time to get here, So we're going to do that. Darius, Ace, Fiddleyok, Dragoon, welcome back. How you all doing? Today we're going to make a little bevy before we get started. And I'm going to walk you through all the stuff I'm gonna use to do that. The first one is this. So I don't like to drink a lot of the same coffee because I have a lot of different kinds of coffee. And I like, working on how to brew them the way that tastes the best to me. So I don't want to drink a lot of it. Now, I also am one of those people that isn't really affected by caffeine. I learned this recently. I am essentially immune to the stimulating effect of caffeine. As far as I know, I've read that there is a gene that some people just like have differently that manipulates them being wakeful when they have caffeine. I do not seem to have it. It doesn't particularly change my energy level when I have even gratuitous amounts of caffeine. I eventually don't feel so good, mind you, but I don't feel hyper. I often feel a little sleepy, which is a reaction a lot of people have too. But I like drinking small amounts of coffee anyway, because I like to experiment with them. I don't want that much coffee right now, so we're going to make a small one. This jar holds 200 milliliters, and I'm going to be brewing about 200 milliliters in to my AeroPress. We're going to brew an AeroPress. And because the coffee grounds will absorb a little bit of the water, that will fit perfectly inside of this jar. It won't overflow. It'll lose some water volume, but not too much. And it should hit a nice wash line right around here. This jar also has measurement markers on it, which I don't think you can see on the stream, maybe very faintly, which means that I can just pour water up to the mark, and I know that's the amount of water that I want to put in. So now I'm going to pour all of this into my kettle, get it to the right temperature, boiling, and then that exact amount of water is the amount of water I'm going to put in my coffee. I don't have to then weigh the water afterward, which is really convenient. So I'm going to go do that. I'm going to pour the water into the kettle. Spill some of it, of course. You got to spill some of it. And now I'm going to turn the kettle on. I'm going to set it to boiling. I'm going to brew my coffee with the hottest water possible. So it's going to be boiling. Now the AeroPress has very good thermal retention. So it's going to be very, very good at holding onto that heat. I'm not going to preheat my AeroPress. There's some debate about whether you should do that. I don't think you need to do that. It's got very good thermal management. It's a very thermally retentive brewer, which is one of its many advantages. So we're going to start boiling the water. Then I'm going to grab my coffee. We'll set up our brewer. We'll get going. It's pretty quick. This will take like 3 or 4 minutes total. Boil. Cool. So now I'm going to use this little scale, and this is the cover from my coffee grinder. I'm going to plop that on here, and this is just the simple little gram scale that's like $10 on Amazon. And I'm going to measure 10 grams of my coffee. Plop and tear. And what are we drinking? What is the coffee? King of Sparta, welcome aboard. How you doing? Today we're making a quick coffee before we start making builds for Chroma. And it's going to be this coffee. This is a... Oh, it's going to get loud because of the kettle. I'll take out some beans and show you. let's see how well you can... No, it's not gonna... You're not gonna be able to see it that well. Yeah, but you get the most important thing, which is that it's a pretty light roasted coffee. They say it's a light roast, but I have found that to be a bit frustrating from brewers sometimes. Occasionally the roaster says it's a light roast from their perspective, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't know, man. This roaster I find has been really good. This is a pretty famous coffee roaster, not sponsored, but it's George Howell Coffee. Near me, a very important figure in the specialty coffee industry, has been really consistently delicious, reasonably priced for how good quality this coffee is. Anyway, it's great. This is a Costa Rican coffee. Costa Rica has this really defined climate, which means the coffee grows very evenly, and you can taste that it has this clarity. That's how I would describe it. It's very sharp. I often find it has kind of like a summer fruit flavor, like peach pie kind of thing, which I really like. And they often have like an interesting baking spice or like cocoa powder kind of thing going on. They don't all taste the same, of course, but I have found that flavor profile has been in a lot of them. They smell, there's this like spiciness, like baking spice, or if you like rye whiskey, it's like a little bit similar to that. Really, really tasty. So this is a light roasted one from Doda. Probably not pronouncing that correctly, but that's a canton in San Jose, and it's a light roasted washed coffee. It's Caturra and Caduai are the varieties, if you're familiar with coffee varieties. I've liked Caturra before, but besides that, that's all you really need to know. It's a light roast. Those are often more acidic. This is not a very acidic light roast. It's pretty chocolatey. Anyway, so let's brew it. So we're going to do 10 grams of my beans. My beans. Oh. Drop some on the floor. I'm going to take some out, dust it to the amount I want. Boop, 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 boop. 10.06, it's fine, right? Now I'm going to grind it. I'm going to grind it medium. You know, not really coarse, not really fine. I think this coffee brews better a little bit on the coarser side. I've experimented with this a bit so far. I've gone through maybe a third of my bag and I've brewed this maybe 6 times. So I'm honing in on where I like it, which is not very coarsely ground, but a little bit coarser than most coffees like this might be ground. Pretty loud. Now, not leaving the coffee in the grinder means that the motor is at full speed when the coffee hits the blades. And when you're brewing a very small amount of coffee like this, that makes a pretty big difference. I've noticed a very significant change in taste, and you can even actually kind of see that the grind size is not the same the whole time, which matters much more when you're grinding only a small amount of coffee. That coffee that starts touching the blades that gets ground differently because they're not sped up, that coffee is a much more significant portion of the total coffee when you're only brewing like 10 grams, right? So anyway, put the motor on before pouring coffee beans in. Good. Shaking it out to make sure I get all the grounds that are stuck inside the grinder out. Oh, it smells so good. Ooh, oh, it smells good. Yeah, okay, cool. Our water's boiling, which means we got to get these grounds, which I already weighed, so we don't have to weigh them again. We know how much water it is, so we don't have to measure that. We need to set up our brewer. This is going to be a little bit difficult to show you on camera. We're using an AeroPress. This is basically a whatever other kind of brewer. You're going to put your coffee and your water in here, and then you're going to let it sit together like any other brewer, and there'll be a filter at the bottom. Really no different than other conventional coffee brewers, except that then you have a plunger to push the coffee out with. This is kind of like a pour over, but you get to push the coffee out to skip some of the slowness of the percolation phase. That was how it was originally designed. Now I'm going to be brewing it inverted, so I'm putting this in the bottom, and it's going to start upside down. Coffee goes in here, water goes in here, then I'm going to cap it. There'll be a minor vacuum that will hold the liquid in place. I'm going to flip it, then we're going to wait, and I'm going to plunge it. Cool? And we're going to plunge it into here. I'll get back to that in a second. So I'll set that up. Fortunately, no need to measure anything. Put that in there. Get the last bit out. I'm just going to take all my boiling water and I'm going to pour all of it without measuring into my inverted AeroPress. This is boiling water, so it's slightly nerve-wracking, but I'm a professional. It's fine. I'm going to pour it all in. It's going to just barely fit, but we measured, so we know it's going to fit. Excellent. Plop that down. And great. Now I'm going to grab my filter cap. I'm going to use 2 paper filters and stick them in there. I don't need to rinse them really because there's so little paper. And I'm going to put the cap on. Push the pressure out. And then we're going to flip it and push it out into here. And I'm going to use this funnel so it fits. Red Drone, welcome back. What's going on? We are making a quick cup of coffee before making some Chroma builds during today's show. After all, Chroma epitomizes the caffeinated gamer mindset. So I thought I would tell you my coffee brewing build, since we are in the middle of letting people find their way into the stream. We do these Warframe Buildcraft streams every week, and so a lot of people that come here every week just aren't here yet, and I thought it'd be nice to entertain you all a little bit while we wait for those people so they don't feel like they miss it. How you doing today? What's up? So our brew time is 2 minutes, of course, because I'm streaming. I have a timer right here, and it's been, we're getting there, actually. So what I'm going to do is push the, there we go. I've pushed the air out of this, and now it's going to flip without losing too much liquid onto here. As you can see, only a tiny, tiny bit of liquid came through. Now we've got this crazy looking, but surprisingly stable little setup. And I'm going to give it a little swirl, let it sit for 30 seconds to settle, and then I'm going to relatively gently plunge it and get that coffee out, and we'll give it a taste. "15 seconds more. In that time, I can seal my bag. Pow. And make sure everyone's notified. I forgot to send that to Rios. Thank you very much. Thank you for asking. Lion, welcome back. What's going on? We're doing okay. We're gonna plunge some coffee, which you can't see, I'm sorry, because my camera angle is butts. Nice. So we've done rather well. As you can see, we have a perfect, exact fit wash line for our coffee. And you may not be able to tell on camera. You can kind of tell. It's kind of lighter in color, right? If you're not familiar with lighter roasted coffees, this is a quite normal color for a light roast of coffee, but significantly less dark looking than like a really dark roast, right? I don't know if you feel this way, but at least here in person, it's visibly different than, this is a pretty light roast of coffee. It's quite visually different than a dark roast. And it's too hot for me. My taste buds are unfortunately pretty sensitive, so I have to wait a while to drink it. I have way less heat tolerance than most people, so it's gonna have to chill for a few minutes, and then we'll try it. How does it smell? And it smells pretty good. It smells, yeah, like chocolatey, but a lot of coffee smells chocolatey. Specifically, this occupies this interesting place where, like, it's sort of dark chocolatey, a little bit like tropical fruit chocolatey, but not so dark. You know, a lot of like pure dark chocolate is it's bitter, but it has that, again, kind of rainforest fruit thing. That's how I think of dark chocolate. And yeah, this doesn't smell like that, but it doesn't smell like milk chocolate. It doesn't smell sweet. It smells like cocoa powder or like hot chocolate mix, that kind of chocolate. A little spicy too, like you put some nutmeg on your hot chocolate, or maybe with whipped cream, like chocolate with whipped cream. Mm, that smells good. I'm looking forward to this one. I brewed this spec, that recipe that I just used. I brewed yesterday, and it came out pretty good. So I'm expecting this to taste good. It's not. This is not an experiment. This should taste good unless I mess something up. So we'll see. The drain, the plunge was pretty clean. It was kind of quick. You don't want it to be too fast or too slow. That'll affect the taste. But it was fine. The speed was fine, so it's probably fine. I really want to take a sip, but then we gotta get started. Well, we can get started while I'll take my first sip. We'll talk about how it tastes, how it turned out, and then I'll keep drinking it while we go over Chroma's abilities, and we'll get started. Welcome back, bastards. Welcome back, Systacks. Is this actual builds or bootlegs? No distinction. Builds that I feel are worth discussing. They're not explicitly intended to be memes, so I guess actual builds. But yeah, I don't know. Whatever you would like to pitch, if I think it's cool, we can totally discuss it. I know that's self-centered of me, but it is my stream. I'm the one who has to discuss it. All right, let's see if we can try it. It's so hot. Okay, I'm going to pour some of it into a shot glass, which I have here, of course. What am I, some kind of pedestrian? Of course I have a shot glass on hand on my coffee bar. We'll give it a little sip. Yeah, okay. It's good. It's a touch sour. Now, acidic sour, right? Like, it's supposed to be acidic. It's supposed to have some acid, some bright fruit acid, refreshing, quenching acid. But there is that kind of negative coffee flavor of like sourness and harshness, you know? Just like there's kind of tasty bitter and also not tasty bitter. Well, you know, it is still a matter of opinion, of course. And it's like this is maybe 90% correct. It's slightly flawed, but not free of defect, but still tasty. And what does it taste like before we begin our journey today? The AeroPress lets a little sediment in, so it has a little bit of that coffee oil. It's kind of textury, a little thick, you know? Yeah, it's nice. It does have some bright fruit, but it's more like strawberry. Like I would describe it as like a chocolate coated strawberry, that kind of thing. It's not like very acidic. It's also not very chocolatey, and it doesn't really have any of the bitter part of coffee. This coffee's roasted quite light, so there's not a lot of that. It's good. That's really all I have to say about it. I don't think this is the world's most complex coffee, which is perfectly fine. I think it's tasty. It's very snacky. I don't think it would taste good with milk. I tried it cold. That was not very good. It's good the way it is. So we'll let that chill here. Thanks for brewing a coffee with me. I hope you found that like a little interesting. I am pretty interested in talking about how you can make really tasty coffee yourself and have a good time making beverages without falling into what I believe is the sort of trap of diminishing returns that a lot of people get into. A lot of people on the internet and popularizing discussing coffee, they're talking about it in a way that it's got a lot of things in the process that they're not really worth the effort for most people, but they technically do a thing that is good. And I just feel like that's misguided. Like you can still enjoy this thing, and these things are meaningful. It's not just people nerding out about something, but you should do the things that make the biggest difference. And I feel that people don't differentiate. They don't talk about, you know, doing this is a lot of effort for a big return. This is a lot of effort for a small return. You know, that's something that I don't like about how a lot of the internet covers coffee. So I hope I did a good job discussing, like, it doesn't have to be literally perfect, because of course it doesn't. We're not, well, we are performing chemistry, but
Behold, A year of Buildcraft.
And a good year it was, Synthrone. Thank you very much for the tier 1 sub. So I don't know, I hope you enjoyed that. Bouncy Bucket, you said, have you tried cold brewing coffee yet? Of course I have. Cold brewing coffee has some problems. It does produce a very drinkable beverage, but it's not very efficient extraction. That is, you don't get very much coffee for your grounds in particular, in my experience anyway. It also doesn't extract a lot of what makes the coffee specifically unique or flavorful. Now, darker roasted coffee, which is what a lot of people are cold brewing, already tastes relatively more similar, but there are still very different, nuanced, interesting dark roasted coffees. And I just don't think that cold brewing is particularly useful if you can produce a cup of coffee that is free of defect in the first place. That being said, if I like the taste of cold brewed dark roasted coffee, generally, and I do think some of them taste different based on their origin. You can use good quality coffee and it makes some difference. I don't think it's a waste. You don't have to drink coffee in the first place. You could have caffeine pills or whatever. So yeah, I think it has its place. Cold brew has its place, but I do feel it's not overrated. But cold brew is popular because it is a very easy way to make coffee that is free of defect. And it's not that hard to just do that without cold brewing coffee. And when you do that, it has a number of advantages. You extract more of the coffee. They're more different from each other, which you may or may not want, right? But I do. So yeah, to be honest with you, the way I would respond to the cold brewing thing is I believe it is kind of boring, but that does not make it bad. Chroma is kind of boring, and we're going to talk about... I mean, I actually don't think so. And I think cold brewing is pretty interesting too, but mostly from a social perspective. So I hope that's kind of an interesting insight on that. Cold brewing I believe is kind of more of an accessibility tool, and I simply don't need it. I am not its intended audience. But it still has some merits. There are still coffees I've gotten that I thought I don't like this anyway except cold brewed. So it's not like I never have cold brewed coffee. I hope that's a satisfying answer. Okay, we got to stop talking about coffee and play some Warframe. Pow. I'll finish drinking this while we discuss the abilities. Chroma. Well, as I said at the top of the show, you know Chroma, we know Chroma. Chroma is a Warframe that gets a reputation for the big bongo value on Vex armor, and Elemental Ward is really good, of course. While Spectral Scream and Effigy, by contrast, are widely considered to be essentially useless. There is some nuance there, and of course we'll talk about it, but let's just address the elephant in the room, like, yes, we know Vex armor.
I like my women, said Hydroid. Liquid.
Ah, yes. I like my coffee how I like my women, said Hydroid. It was then revealed that Zandy was the voice actor for Hydroid. There is no voice actor for Hydroid, lol. Okay, Lily, welcome back. Thank you for the Prime sub for 29 months. What's going on? How you doing? We just got started. Welcome back. Chroma has a double jump. You may not have known that they gave Chroma like a real passive. This is fine. You know, it's a good mobility passive. Not very frilly, but that's fine. I think it looks very cool. If you haven't seen it, when we play later, you'll see it. I think that's really neat. And a fun little flavor. Makes you feel a little bit more like a Dragon Knight, which is one of the... I will be including some of my criticisms of Chroma. One of them is that I think his concept is very weak. These abilities do not feel enough like dragon-related abilities. The good abilities are not dragon-y, and it's the bad abilities that are dragon-themed. So, it's something we'll come back to. Anyway. Okay, Spectral Scream. This is an ability, you activate it, and it drains energy per second. You breathe a cone of elemental energy. Now, you can tap this to cycle through elements. Now, if you haven't played Chroma in a while, you may, like me, have forgotten that they changed Chroma so that you can now swap elements during a mission, which is a pretty significant buff to a lot of Chroma's abilities, pretty much except Vex armor, which is perfectly warranted. This ability also does okay damage nowadays. The range is good, it's okay. There's not a lot of other incentive to build range, maybe. and it's got high status. It guarantees status. This is an okay damage ability. The real problem with Spectral Scream at the moment is that you can't do other stuff. You know, you can jump around, but like you can't shoot your guns while doing it. And this ability is on a Warframe that has one of the game's most powerful damage increasing abilities. That is more the problem. It used to be that this ability was just really weak. Nowadays, I don't really feel like the power level of this ability is a problem exactly. This is more a difficulty with damaging Warframe powers in Warframe in general, not really specifically with Spectral Scream, in my opinion. Although it would help if you could do other stuff while doing this, like shoot and such. That would be powerful. Chroma's already so powerful, I'm not sure it really matters, but that's a thought. This ability's buffed form, an ability to swap elements, is not so bad. And again, if you could do it without stopping like shooting and stuff, that would be really good for a lot of reasons. That might be a little strong, but I think it would be cool. It'd probably be fine. They could make the damage lower if they wanted to do it like that. As it is, it's not that this ability is bad exactly. It's just that I don't think you should do this instead of shooting enemies unless you simply want to do that. Okay, Elemental Ward. This is a complicated ability. This ability has 4 different forms, and now that you can swap elements during a mission, you can use all 4 of them whenever you'd like. So we will talk about all of them. But basically, you create an aura for yourself, and it does apply to allies that are nearby. Lion of Chimera says, I like my coffee how I like my women. I'm a tea drinker. Ah, yes. Tea or coffee. Whack. Me? Tea and coffee. Come on. What are you doing? Welcome back, Lion. What's going on? I have a lot to say about brewing tea that is very similar to a lot of what I said about brewing coffee. There are some very interesting differences, too, in my opinion. Welcome back. Right, Elemental Ward. Heat. It gives you more health based on strength by 1%. This can give you a very, very significantly larger health pool. It also does damage per second around you with a low status chance. This one gives you just a lot of health. This is a very good pairing with Vex Armor because it gives you a lot of armor. This increases your effective health to absolutely ludicrous heights. You will not be killed by direct damage that does not ignore armor if you have Vex Armor and Heat Elemental Ward. There is this whole thing about like giving it to allies to effectively heal them that I forget exactly what the deal is with that. But anyway, straightforward, good. I'm going to talk about cold next because I think heat might seem like unexciting to some people, but a lot of people like cold, and I feel like heat is the thing that does the thing if you want to be tankier, because you already have crazy armor from Vex Armor. You do not value more armor. At least that's how I feel. Cold also deflects bullets, and it's got a good status chance. Cold is kind of like there's that one Mesa augment that like deflects bullets when you have Shatter Shield active. Cold Elemental Ward will make it very difficult for enemies like heavy gunners to hurt you in any meaningful way. But besides that, I do not think that Cold Elemental Ward really makes sense. You're sacrificing an ability that provides diverse offensive and defensive benefits, we'll get to that, to give Chroma something that is one of the things he already has such a crazy amount of. And it's not even a particularly large amount of armor. So I don't really see there being a huge merit here. Additionally, the reflected damage is of course not significant. Enemies don't do meaningful damage to themselves at higher levels. And the status chance, while it is a good way to defend yourself, is just unnecessary when you have such an incredible armor value, right? So personally, I think that Cold Elemental Ward is essentially pointless, but I know people like it because it seems like it'd make you really tanky. That's why I wanted to highlight Heat. Gonna catch back up on chat a bit more, but I just would like to remind chat, I see a couple people saying, plans on talking about Cold Elemental Ward with Zada's Whisper? Sure, but this part of the show, we're just going over the abilities in depth to get everyone on the same page. I'm not trying to say the ability is completely useless in every possible way, but we need to start from somewhere, and not everybody even knows what, for example, Toxin Elemental Ward does. So we're going to talk about that first. please understand that this is a long, hours-long show where we talk about the Buildcraft for a frame, not something where every breath I'm going to explain every possible use of an ability. Of course, that's why all of you are here. I'm very thankful that you're all here so that I have ideas on hand that I don't know about. I haven't heard of that Zada's Whisper interaction. It's a good thing you're here, but please don't feel I'm ignoring that when I don't address it right away. We just have to start from somewhere, okay? Cherry, thank you for the raid. What's going on? How you doing? Well met. And welcome aboard, folks from Cherry's stream. We have not been acquainted before, and so you must be given a proper plug. So folks, our glorious hosts today, you've caught us at a pretty good time. We were just getting through Chroma's abilities, talking about them in their unmodified form, but in a lot of detail, so we're all on the same page. Gives people plenty of time to get their ideas flowing, and then we're going to get into builds. Of course, I have things I like on Chroma. I think a lot of people who play Warframe do, but we're hoping to find whatever variety is there. So you came at a good time. We're just getting into it. I'm fairly well. I had a week. It's a lot better now that we're at the end of the week with this is the start of my work week, when the streaming is starting. So I hope that your stream went well. How was it? Anything in particular you folks were doing? And again, I know from my personal experience, I tend to be a bit tired after streaming, so if you gotta go, that's cool. Well met. We also made a delicious cup of coffee, of course. A small cup of coffee. Ooh, yeah. Okay, that's really nice. So we'll put a pin in the Zada's Whisper cold elemental ward thing. We will come back to that. People seem very excited about that. Put a pin in it. Other two elemental wards. Toxin. This is the one I use most of the time. It is a very, very large reload speed buff, mostly. Holster speed, you get some AoE toxin status. That's fine, I guess. But the reload speed, it's a gigantic reload speed buff. This is also Chroma's Helminth ability, and so you could give that to other frames. Reload speed can be converted into damage pretty directly on a lot of weapons. On bows, on simply weapons with very small magazine capacities, a lot of shotguns. This is really nice, for example. Reload speed is essentially a damage buff. It just depends on the weapon, and it is a very large amount of reload speed. Better still, Chroma has a different kind of damage buff. This is a frame that has access to basically two different kinds of damage increase, and they're both a very large value. This is a very large amount of reload speed. This is a very large amount of base damage, which is really, really good. So something to come back to later. I don't have a lot else to say about Toxin Elemental Ward, but I think if you're not dying when you're playing Chroma, I would take Toxin, and that's why. It's essentially a damage buff. Finally, electricity. Also don't have a lot to say about this. It gives you more shields. We're going to come back to that when we talk about charging Vex armor. So I'll actually leave it at that for now. But it also reflects damage dealt to you. Again, the amount of damage enemies deal to themselves is not significant, even if multiplied by a huge amount. So I haven't had a lot of success with this, like actually hurting enemies. Maybe you have. It does, if they get electricity proc, that will stop them from attacking you, but you have a buff that gives you 1,000% of your armor, so I don't think you need that, but if you do, then it's certainly there. Hope you have a good rest of your day too, Cherry. Thanks very much. And speaking of that, Vex armor. Picked a tactical time to... Does anybody want to get off? We're going to talk about Vex armor now. So you get armor when your shields take damage, and you get weapon damage, it's base damage, when your health takes damage. It's so much damage that obviously if it was a separate multiplier, that would be crazy. But yeah, you already have a lot of base damage, but this is just so much that it's still a very significant damage increase, of course. The armor. So you need to lose, if memory serves, it's 400 or 420, I forget which, shields to fully charge the armor buff on Vex armor. You need to lose more shields, in other words, than Chroma has unmodded. So if you don't get any more shields, then Chroma will not fully charge Vex Armor by merely having full shields. This is a pretty minor issue. There's a lot of things you can do. You can, of course, use Electricity Elemental Ward, which will promptly give you enough shields, but what I'm going to be recommending doing in a minute, we're not necessarily going to talk about this exact build. This is just a very simple rudimentary example. But if you use things like Brief Respite and Augur mods, and you use a bit of negative efficiency, like from Blind Rage, then when you cast Vex Armor, you will give yourself enough shields to fully charge Vex Armor's shield portion automatically, every time, because Augur mods can give you overshields. So simply by building like this build right here, just casting Vex Armor guarantees that you have enough shields to fully charge the armor buff, which means you don't have to worry about that at all. You can just do that and then never think about it again. And politely, I don't think that it takes a lot of convincing to get people to run Blind Rage on their Chroma build. Maybe it does. I kind of don't think so. So Brief Respite, okay, but the Augur mods too. Again, like these are not exactly the worst mods in the game that have the biggest opportunity costs. And if you run them, then you do not have to worry about charging up the armor part, which I think is really nice quality of life. You obviously don't have to do that. There are other ways to accomplish this, but I like this one. I think it's very clean, and Chroma's Vex Armor and Elemental Ward have very, very long base durations. Not extremely long, but like they're good and you can build a lot of duration, which means you don't have to cast them very often. So again, like you don't want to do that, that's fine, but it is an option. Not a lot else to say here. It's a big base damage buff. You should pretty much just forget about building any other base damage anywhere else. I might just leave my base damage mods on my weapons because I can't be bothered would be my response, but it would gain you damage if you took them off, because the marginal benefit of increasing your base damage further when you have this much is extremely small. When you already have 750% base damage, adding 150% more isn't more valuable than adding like more elemental damage a lot of the time. Technically, but I personally don't think that's particularly meaningful because this ability already makes you do an irrelevantly high amount of damage. For another example, you folks have told me about this cool Zada's Whisper cold elemental ward thing, which I'm really looking forward to talking about and experimenting with, learning about. But if all it does is make you do more damage, I think it's important to remember that that may be less valuable than it sounds to this build. On YouTube, the YouTube community for Warframe is focused around making these builds that do a nominally high amount of damage, but I do not care about that here. If you do, that's fine, but I really don't. If I'm already killing everything, I don't really care if something makes me do even more damage. If you do, that's fine, but again, there's just really no point. You could talk to anyone else. So I am very curious to see how that works, just because I want to learn about it. But I think the other thing about Vex Armor is it's so much damage that it does sort of call into question, like, what is even the point of doing anything that increases your damage any further? Unless it's like a usability thing like Toxin's reload speed, which again does also multiply that benefit. Cool. Anyway, Vex Armor and Effigy. This makes you take off your pelt. You gain movement speed, you lose armor, you get increased credits. This is a weird idiosyncrasy of this ability. It's like because dragons and treasure, so credits, I guess. So I don't know. But anyway, it doubles your credits, okay. It costs a lot of energy. The drain is, fine initially, but then the drain per second is huge, massive energy drain over time. But it does have an augment that does a lot of damage. It's been buffed recently, so we will talk about that at some point. Overall, not a lot to say here. Again, very much like Spectral Scream, these are abilities that cost a lot of energy, and they pretty much only give you like a damage increase on a Warframe that has a practically unsurpassed damage buff. It doesn't matter except from a playstyle perspective. But since Spectral Scream's buff and Effigy's augment buff, these abilities do acceptable damage output. So if you just want to use them, that's a thing that you can do a lot better than you could in the past. I don't think there's a whole lot to say about these simply because of the shadow of this ability. But yeah, anyway, so that's Chroma. Let us dig into the builds. So if you haven't been to this stream before, now I want to hear from you about, like, Helminth abilities is a big one. So we'll talk about that Zelda's Whisper thing. Mods that you like building on Chroma for certain purposes, different playstyles that you enjoy with Chroma. Now, I might not be interested in talking about all of them. For example, so Lucifer, you're saying some Warframes can surpass Vex Armor and damage boost, but that just doesn't matter. I mean, if you care about it, that's fine. But you can have way less of a damage boost than this, and everything will still die. So it doesn't matter that other Warframes can, like, technically do more damage. That is, you don't get rewarded for doing that in Warframe. If you value that, that's fine, but there isn't any reason for us to put it in a discussion for everyone. So I hope you can understand that. It's not that I think that you're wrong, it just isn't relevant. You can kill everything with this much damage, so you don't need more. But again, that depends on each individual player. If you do need more damage than this to kill enemies, then sure, put on more damage. But if you have a fully built weapon, this will be enough to push it over the threshold. And again, a simple example of, like, very long endurance runs. But you're not rewarded for doing those, really. Warframe is not trying to encourage you to play long endurance missions. That is not the game's stated end game. You can do them, but there isn't any reason to talk about builds for them because they are not a intended part of the game. Just like I wouldn't tell you that my drift frame builds for playing drift frame, a game mode that I made up, are like core builds for a Warframe. That makes no sense. That's just something that I personally like doing. It's not particularly relevant to Warframe. You enjoy them, that's perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with that. Great, even. But it isn't really significant for talking about the Warframe's balance. The Warframe was, after all, also not designed for that. So that's why I'm not going to talk about it anymore. There's not a lot to talk about. Right, so I would like to start here. This is the build that I was using before the Helminth system. I haven't played Chroma very much in the time since the Helminth system came out, because I traditionally found Chroma, okay, all right, a little bit boring. You and me, we were on the same page about that, I think. But the Helminth system does offer some interesting options, and I am excited to go through every Warframe in the game, just because I want to hear what you all have to say about them. And so that is reason enough for me. So I'm going to explain why I have on what I have, and then I'd like to talk about that cold elemental ward Zelda's Whisper thing. I have a feeling I might understand what's happening, but I want to make sure I do. So if one of you would like to explain it in your own words, that sounds cool. I'm going to tell you what I have on here and why, but the Helminth system may recontextualize a lot of these modding decisions, so we'll see. Right, so I mentioned before how I like having Brief Respite and 2 Augur mods, because with Blind Rage, this causes Vex Armor to grant shields and overshields that are enough to charge its armor portion automatically. You don't need any more, you can just click the ability, and when the shields are emptied out, you will have enough armor. And again, there are parts of Warframe that you could play, like very, very long endurance runs, that in which this will not protect you well enough. But Warframe does not encourage you to play those ways. In the Steel Path, you will survive enemy damage if you use this armor buff and adaptation without significant difficulty. So for what it's worth, I don't personally feel that we need to do much else about survivability either. Now, Vex Armor is an armor buff it's a percent that's additive with other armor mods. So if you were to add Umbral Fiber, like, while this is sensible because it gives you more strength and health, which that's not bad, the armor buff itself is rather small because it's just adding to, you're getting 150% armor or whatever. But that's just adding to, you already have 972% armor. So the increase from an armor mod is not very significant on top of Vex Armor, unless they've changed how that multiplies, which they might have. Please tell me if you believe that they have. But yeah, so that's why I'm not running an armor mod. I do want health. Again, I'm often using Toxin Elemental Ward, but you could use Heat Elemental Ward. Maybe drop the health mod. But I want the strength anyway. These are perfectly reasonable. And I've built, as you can see, a lot of strength and a lot of duration, and I dumped efficiency and range because I'm selfish. I'm just gonna cast Elemental Ward and Vex Armor. They last like a minute, and they charge themselves. It's extremely easy to use, but very boring. You know, it doesn't really do anything. It's just very, very good damage, and you're not going to die. And Handspring, or you could very well use Prime Sure-Footed, for example. So Chroma, and the way I have Chroma built right at this moment, this is, I would argue, one of the most straightforward Warframe builds in the entire game. You literally just hit 2 buttons, and you do a ludicrous amount of damage, and you're not going to die. And your weapons are very easy to use. They have really no downtime because of the reload speed, and like that's it. But everything is dead, and you're not going to be killed in the Steel Path. So, which is why I'm now excited to talk about, like, okay, but what else? And the 2 primary orders of business that come to my mind anyway. Let's clear off a build. No? Right-clicking mods usually takes them off. Why is that not working? There we go. The 2 primary things that come to mind are, I think people are saying they want to talk about guided effigy. Oh, I just got a Nightwave challenge, lol. And we can also talk about that cold Zada's Whisper thing, which chat is explaining right now. Let's take a look, shall we? Boop, 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 boop. Right, so there's guided effigy, and then there's this cold elemental ward thing. I'm gonna read Systax. Basically, any bullet attractor also acts as a bullet reflector. With cold elemental ward, you get a separate damage multiplier on reflected damage, which converts all reflected damage to cold damage. Okay. A similar thing happens with Mason or Shadow Shield Augment. Zada's Whisper also massively increases headshot damage because of some double-dipping shenanigans with headshot multipliers, so the headshot gun arcane can also massively increase damage. And another explanation, long story short, when Zada's is active, the reflected bullets from Cold Ward are forced to deal Void procs as well as cold ones, and then if you shoot that enemy, the Void proc yoinks your damage and treats it as if it too is reflected by Cold Ward, because the Void proc source was a reflection, resulting in your own weapon damage inheriting the over 8x multiplier from Cold Ward. So it's essentially a bug, though, or at least an extremely unintuitive application of that damage reflection. My philosophy about this type of topic is that if it isn't clear that it is, like, the game doesn't say it's supposed to work that way, we haven't had any confirmation it's going to work that way, and it feels very exploity, like a loophole, you can disagree about whether or not that, like, should be in the game. I don't know or care. But Digital Extremes has historically taken those things out almost every single time they've come up. And I'm not trying to say that's good or bad, although I actually do think it's good, and I'll briefly talk about why. But you can be fairly confident that that will probably get removed from the game. So I'm not going to encourage you to invest in it. The other thing I have to say is what I predicted before. You know, it sounds like a huge amount of damage, but I feel like I don't need that. I don't really need that. Again, this is likely popular for the small community of people that are doing, like, really long endurance runs. That makes sense. That's where that amount of damage would be appropriate. But it's just irrelevant for normal gameplay. So there's that element as well. So I personally don't have a lot else to say. But again, there's a problem here. Warframe is a game that is not very consistently modded. It isn't a game where these things are reliably taken out just because they're, like, kind of clearly unintended, you know? That is an issue. So, for example, like, I predicted somebody would say, it has been around since Zada got released, which Zaku, which doesn't mean anything. There are things that are definitely bugs that have been in the game for almost a decade now, and we just have to make a decision, you and I, and we don't have to make the same decision about whether you're going to invest build resources in those things. I'm not going to, and that is why. I hope that makes sense. It just doesn't seem meaningful to me. It seems like if it's just giving you a ton of damage, and it seems pretty clearly not intended to work that way, it's sort of exploiting spaghetti code, those things have been consistently taken out of the game, and you're not even getting something that I as a player really need. That's what I think. Now, all of that being said, I do think it's true, something, Pixel, you're right here with me. Something that I've said a lot in the past, that I've been saying a lot in this section, is that it's like you don't need that amount of damage for any rewarding stuff in Warframe. Now, I stick by that in general. I believe that when I say that, I'm generally saying it to people to whom the point is clear. I am arguing that endurance runs are not objectively valuable. They're a goal the player decides on. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good, even. This is a game about that to some degree, but it doesn't really make sense to evaluate things using a custom goal that only a few players have decided is meaningful to them. When I'm saying that I don't feel like that amount of damage is meaningful, I'm referring to that. But if we get into it, it's not entirely accurate that there is no place where that amount of damage is valuable. Pixel, you're saying it really well. There are a few places in Warframe, like the highly rewarding nature of disruption and the sheer sponginess of certain demolist enemies. You know, disruption, there's the 4 keys. The demolist is the guy that runs and tries to blow up the pylon. On the Steel Path, those enemies are very, very tanky. Now, Pixel, you say more damage is way more valuable in non-niche content than it used to be. Steel Path Disruption is niche content. That is still niche content. But the game does explicitly reward you for doing that. So I do feel that it's important to qualify this, like, does the damage actually matter thing. And because of that, to show you that that is not just lip service, we're going to do it. However, I saw Lucifer mention this. My opinion is that this seems like it would be better on Zaku. I feel like I kind of want this effect more on Zaku. It feels like if it does so much damage, Chroma having another damage buff is at the very least kind of redundant if it just such a ludicrous amount of damage. So wouldn't Zaku gain more from this? But anyway, it doesn't matter. We can try it on Chroma just as well. So we'll put it on. Oh, interesting. Okay, so as I would have caught, but didn't, this is one of those weird places where they've done this odd thing with the damage buffing abilities. Let me briefly explain. So what's confusing is that if you look at the abilities, it says you can only have a single damage buffing ability on your Warframe. If you look at the abilities that they're referring to when they say damage buffing ability, it's not, as you might expect, abilities that buff your damage. It's only some of those abilities. And you might be thinking, oh, okay, so I've watched your streams before, Zandy. Now you're going to say that it's only the base damage buffing abilities, but it isn't. It isn't that either. That is weird. It is pretty arbitrary which abilities it is choosing. Zada's Whisper is like sort of a separate damage multiplier. Vex Armor is a base damage multiplier. Now, I'm not trying to say that these aren't in practice similarly powerful damage multipliers. I'm not trying to say that something like, for example, Volt's Shock with the Shock Trooper augment, like that is a damage buff. The augment is literally a damage buff. It's a damage buff. That's all it does, is a damage buff. But that's disingenuous in some way, and I'm aware of that. Like, it's a much smaller damage buff. It buffs elemental damage by an amount that is similar to the amount of damage that Zada's Whisper buffs. But Zada's Whisper is a separate multiplier, and Shock Trooper is not. So they are both literally damage buffs, right? But it makes a certain kind of sense that this wouldn't count as a damage buffing ability, and the other one, like, would, you know? Again, there are things like Grendel's Nourish. Now, this is a damage buff. This can be a pretty decent ability, but it buffs, again, it's just elemental damage, and it's a lot less. It's only 50% at base. It's affected by strength, and it's elemental damage. It's not a separate multiplier, and it's not, you know, Chroma's Vex Armor isn't a separate multiplier, but it's a lot. Like, the value is like 10 times higher, right? So, just to be clear, I'm not trying to say that I don't get what, like, when they say a damage buffing ability, all right. What they mean is like a very powerful damage buffing ability. I just wanted to note that it's a pretty arbitrary list. That's all I'm trying to say. And in practice, if you put Zada's Whisper and like Shock Trooper on a Warframe, having two different damage buffing abilities, even if one of them is like a weaker one or whatever, it's still a ludicrously powerful amount of damage. I really don't like this. That's basically what I'm trying to say. I hope you'll forgive my diversion. I think this is pointless. If this isn't actually good in most normal gameplay anyway. You have to be doing the hardest content in the game, and then it's got to be something like, again, the Steel Path Disruption with the Demolists for this to even be meaningful. And even then, like, you could just let players do it at that point. It affects so little of the game. I don't know. But whatever, we're here to discuss what it does. I think it's a silly restriction that doesn't have like any practical effect. And again, we're not going to get into it now, but the important thing to note is that it's not consistent. Like, you might be thinking, oh, so it is all like really big damage buffs, right? And it isn't. No, there are some that slip through. Like Lucifer's bring up the very excessive one is like Furious Javelin. That Excalibur augment is of a quite similar magnitude to these damage buffs, and that stacks. That it doesn't pop up that restriction when you do that. It's just arbitrary. It doesn't make any sense. There isn't like a good reason for it being that way. This is just the part of Warframe's development that's not that good. Developers, I hope you'll accept my stern but non-hateful feedback. I'm not sure it like matters that much. I just feel like you've done it in a way, because it doesn't matter, you should not do it the way it currently is. Like, because it doesn't matter, you should just not do this rather than doing it in an arbitrary way. That's what I think. But the community has this really weird attitude about this. Like, again, it really doesn't actually matter, but people really insist on discussing it. People really have a scab to pick about, like, but it does too much damage. And I really don't. I'll be honest, I don't understand that. But when I knew we were going to do Chroma today, you and I both knew that this was going to be the kind of topic that was going to come up, right? Like, we were not born yesterday here. So there's nothing wrong with discussing it. If you have things to say, chat, I invite you to use my space, that at the end of the day is my career. And when you say something in my chat, you are stapling it onto my forehead for all intents and purposes. But I invite you to go ahead and use that space to say what you think. I might not read it out and talk about it, but you are welcome to discuss that topic more if you want to. I just don't have anything else to say. So since we brought up the damage thing so much, we are going to briefly demonstrate this Zada's Whisper thing. So as we discussed before, basically this is doing some spaghetti code stuff with like the damage multiplier from Cold Elemental Ward when attacks are reflected is like applying to the Bullet Attractor aura from Zada's Whisper's Void procs, which then means when you shoot the enemy, it like gains that damage multiplier, which is very weird. But yes, you would predict that it probably does an absurd amount of damage, right? In fact, we can just put this exact build on that. There's really no need to make a build, right? It's just going to be a bunch of damage. So let's just do that. Yeah, in fact, there really is no sense in making like a whole build because we're just demonstrating that it does a ludicrous amount of damage, which of course it does. Pow. That's a lot of duration and a lot of strength. And more than that doesn't particularly matter. And chat's saying I need to use hit scan or beam weapons. Okay, I'll use like... Oh, I don't know. Dealer's choice. What do you want to see me do infinite damage with? Soma. Sure. What's on here? Whatever, this is fine. Not what I would normally use, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, so if I understand correctly, chat, what we're doing here is we're going to swap to, that's the wrong one. We've got Cold Elemental Ward. We're going to activate that. We're going to activate Zada's Whisper. Then we're going to shoot them. Is that... We'll just crank the enemy level. Now, you might have been thinking, like, okay, they died really quick. But what we really want to see is, like, let's wait till Zada's Whisper goes off, and then we're going to shoot them again, and you're going to see just how much that was increasing the damage. Otherwise, it's not really meaningful, right? But, yeah. Again, it does Yeetus Deletus levels of damage. It's an interesting consequence that because of that arbitrary, like, 2 damaging abilities at once thing that isn't actually consistent, because of that restriction, you can't keep Vex armor, but you would only want to do this at, like, mostly levels of content where you wouldn't, like, the armor wouldn't be meaningful. It's really only, like, Pixel, that example you gave, of, like, Steel Path Disruption, stuff like that specifically. Those are the very few places in the game where you could be surviving with the armor from Vex armor, and you would value this ludicrous level of damage, but you already do a ludicrous level of damage. Maybe we should do some Steel Path Disruption with, like, my build that isn't doing this. I think that's what we need to do later. Anyway, so we're going to do that again. I'm just not going to buff the damage, and you're going to see that it's, like, nothing. You know, it's, like, not terrible, because this is a fully modded weapon that does good damage and stuff. But you can see, like, compared to the damage we were doing before, this is nothing, right? So again, just for scale, for folks like me that haven't seen this combo of abilities before, it is increasing your damage by a ludicrous amount. It is way more than just, like, you know, it looked like, okay, they just die, but, like, no, you literally, I'm one-shotting them with an assault rifle that fires 20 times per second. Like, it does an absurd amount of damage, okay? It really does do an absolutely ludicrous amount of damage. And I think it's pretty clear that this is, like, gonna get removed from the game. But who even knows when? Like, you decide for yourself if you care about that. My job is to show it to you all and talk about it, and then you can decide for yourself. And again, like, there's other stuff you could add. You could add headshot damage arcanes. You could, you know, fiddle with your build even more. It doesn't particularly make sense to build, like, hunter munitions in this situation, in my opinion, because the enemy's going to die so fast if you just build upfront damage. This isn't even, like, the weapon I would necessarily... There's a lot of things, right? But that's not really the point. The point is to demonstrate just how trivially you can Yeetus Deletus the enemies with this level of damage. Cool. Whoa, that was a misclick. But while we're here, it seems a shame not to go above decks. Excuse me, that was a misclick. I didn't mean to do that. Outsider, thanks for the raid. I was so pleasantly surprised by your presence that I clicked a button on my stream deck and sent us down into the bowels of the ship, which means that, of course, we have to go above decks. A quick thank you to Zalveris for being my most recent patron. Today, Zalveris's video on my question and answer channel came out. It's a 1 hour and 15-minute long video, my longest video on that channel ever, talking about a D&D build where they're teleporting around a siege cannon as their weapon, which was badass. It was cool. If you're interested in that, go check it out. Again, I think a lot of people, like, you probably don't want a 75-minute video of me just talking about D&D, but the few people that do, there it is. Thank you also to Holotones and Audioforce for really, really generous tips. $150 and $69. Nice. This is really meaningful because I'm currently working to the point of being able to move out and fully support my income by myself. and I do not make enough money for that yet, but we're pretty close. It's at the point where, I'm not going to stop, but I don't actually make enough money to live off of. So it is extremely meaningful at this point in my career to be tipped such generous amounts. Now, I get it. Like Holotones and Audioforce, you folks are here for a lot of streams, and you're watching videos on a lot of the YouTube channels. Like, I'm entertaining you a lot. But it still means a lot to me that you feel like it's worth that to you. You do not have to pay me to get that entertainment, but eventually people do need to pay me so that I can keep doing it, and you did that, so thank you. Speaking of which, actually, thank you to Lily, Synthrone, and Snake Eyes for my most recent subs. I hope you enjoy your time in the gun ports of the Zandy vessel. And thank you to all of the new followers, especially Lucifer, who just followed a minute ago. Cheers. Welcome aboard. Watch your step as you climb up the rope. I'm gonna quickly finish the discussion we were just having before we move on, because I like, Lucifer, what you said. I think the damage decision comes up because at the end of the day, Chroma doesn't provide a lot besides damage. Yeah, that's perfectly reasonable. I think, sure, you may be compelled by my whole thing about, like, but you just don't need that much damage, like, most of the time. That's true, but Chroma doesn't do anything else, really, you know? Fair enough. That's a good way to put it. It's at least an elegant way to explain, like, well, but we're still talking about it. And you are absolutely right. I think the reason that I want to get into it a little bit is because, like, what else would we be talking about? You know? So right on, totally. But yeah, if you were gonna do this, if you're gonna do the big bongos out as whisper thing, I agree with Bastards. Like, maybe you're looking at, like, gas damage. Currently, gas has this really weird place in Warframe where when they rebalanced all the status effects and kind of cleaned them up, gas became a much more coherent, like, understandable, clear status effect. From a game design perspective, the effect of gas damage makes way more sense in its current form. But the problem is that Warframe's development is always really inconsistent about this, and they didn't really make the damage work out. There's something with Warframe where the playtesting or the practicality of the abilities just is really never right. And so gas, in the process of becoming more streamlined, a much cleaner, more sensible effect, in its current form, gas is. In the process of that, gas's damage became very low, which means that in its current state, it's really good if you do an irrelevantly high amount of damage, and if not, then it's usually pretty bad. So this is the perfect situation to look at something like gas damage, because it no longer really matters how much damage you're doing. So I would consider strongly building gas damage. That's I don't have anything else to say, but that's a very good insight. Right, so now that we've talked about that, I want to move on to the other thing that people brought up, and that was guided effigy. Chroma has a couple other augments. I'll just very briefly tackle them because I don't have a lot to say. This lets you give your elemental ward to allies, and then if they walk away, they keep it. That's not bad, but this would be something, like, you know, if you want to use this, probably you're playing co-op, like you're playing through the game with a friend or friends. Like, this is great in that case. Or it could be kind of interesting for, like, if like in the picture it works on, like, sortie defense targets, that might be okay. I could see that being all right, but you could give your whole team the ability to do the cold elemental ward combo. Anyway, that's something to think about, but there's not a lot else to say. And then Vexing Retaliation, a really interesting augment in principle that I feel like just doesn't make that much sense in practice. This is another one where it's a pretty good way to defend yourself, but it's just unnecessary with Chroma's level of defenses at any level of content where Chroma's defenses would work. You know, Vex armor is either keeping you alive just fine already, or it isn't. In either case, this doesn't change that. So go figure. For what it's worth, I do think this is a little worse than it used to be too. Blast used to knock enemies down, and this meant that enemies couldn't really attack you consistently, because when you took a meaningful amount of damage on your health, everybody would just get knocked over. And having them knocked over wasn't always great, but it did mean they weren't going to get to keep attacking you. Now puncture and blast just make enemies hit you less and for less damage. That's not, like, again, not necessarily bad per se. It's just not what I'm looking for on an ability that gives me 1000% of my armor. So I don't have anything else to say about those, but that's what they are. Now, guided effigy. So this was recently buffed. There was that round of augment buffs, and they buffed this. This is one of the ones they buffed, and they buffed it a lot. So we're going to talk about it. We have played with this a tiny bit before on the stream, and we'll play with it a little more. I am going to ask you all a question. You're going to let me know if you don't feel this way. But my gauge is that many folks want to play Chroma, but they think that he's boring. They think that Vex Armor and Elemental Ward is obviously very good, but just boring. And a lot of people, it seems, want to use Effigy and Spectral Scream, but they're just not meaningful compared to the damage that this does. Guided Effigy, now in its buffed form, means there is at least something you would be doing that would do like high damage. Now, before we even get into this, I do want to highlight that the main problem here is no longer that Spectral Scream and Effigy with Guided Effigy don't do good damage. They now do good damage. The problem is you still do more damage by just shooting enemies. And you may not consider that a problem. You might say, well, I just don't care. I want to use these abilities. And if that's you, your problem has been solved because they now do enough damage that you can kill them. You can kill enemies with them. Especially Guided Effigy, I think, like you want this. If I just described you as a player, you like put this on, use this. I'll save you some time. Just make a build around this. But we will talk about it a little bit because I think this is kind of interesting. In particular, I think the stunning part is fascinating, and it gives you energy. That's not a very common type of effect. So we will talk about it a little bit. There is not much else to talk about on Chroma. But if you have other Helminth ability ideas, I'd be quite interested to hear about them. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to make a build for this. We're going to maybe play it a little bit. But let me just answer a few quick, like probably kind of obvious questions, right? The first one is the energy refund on hit affected by strength? So my memory is that it's affected by, it's got like that weird efficiency interaction. Yep. So the energy refund is kind of balanced the way that, Nidus's first ability, the Stomp. Nidus's first ability has that thing where, it costs energy, but then if you hit 4 enemies, it refunds itself. And if you build efficiency, it's balanced in such a way that it doesn't gain you energy exactly, like it still just refunds itself, Guided effigy is the same way as far as I can tell. So if you have negative efficiency, the ability costs more to use, but guided effigy refunds you more energy as if to like pay back the increased energy cost, and vice versa. So if you have positive efficiency, Guided Effigy gives you less energy per hit because it doesn't like need to refund you as much energy. I believe that's their logic. That's weird and confusing to me, but that is how it works. It's affected by efficiency and it's inversely affected by efficiency. Negative efficiency makes you gain more energy per enemy hit, which you should build negative efficiency. Maybe, So that's odd. Again, it's a drain per second ability, so the idea that it like refunds its cost makes like not that much actual sense. But I sort of mostly don't, but kind of get what they were going for. Anyway, that's how it works, okay? I don't know why, but that is how it works. If you build efficiency, it inversely affects the energy refund on this ability. And of course, the damage is affected by strength, obviously, quite a lot. You put on Blind Rage, you do 8,000 damage per second to enemies in the line. 8,000 damage per second. Yike. Cool. Let me catch back up on chat a bit. And then we're going to break, and then we're going to make a build around this, and we're going to go from there. So we talked about the energy being affected by strength, the refund being affected by strength. It is, but inversely, which is weird. I see a few people talking about the damage thing, going back to like damage chroma. You could build something that makes your damage more AoE, like build gas damage on your weapons. You could use breach surge or something that makes your damage like affect an area, like you're doing crazy damage to a few targets, but then it hits multiple targets. That's a great idea. I feel like you could just use an AoE weapon, but that it's not like that's smart. I just personally feel like it's not what excites me. I don't want to make this build better at killing enemies. I want to make it good at other stuff. And I will talk about that after we come back from the break too. But that's just me. It's not unreasonable to go like Breach Surge or Bastards. You said like the mecha set distributes like slash damage to a big area. Does that work with gas too? Yes. So you could do that. If you do a crazy amount of damage, like that will kill everything on the screen for sure. Personally, on this build, just to, not hold you in suspense or whatever, I'm kind of keen on getting some kind of crowd control or a safety net utility, really. And it would be kind of interesting. Yeah, like Resonator. That's a fun idea. Resonator with effigy, so you can move the enemies around and then they're grouped up and then you throw guided effigy at them. That's kind of cool. I will put that on the short list. Resonator with effigy. Yeah, that's neat. I'm picking up what you're putting down about that. I know without the augment, effigy is affected by the damage bonus from Vex armor. What about with the augment? I do not know. We can test that. I'll write that on the list. Guided effigy Vex armor? Question mark. Zalveris, welcome back. And I also saw someone new, Hero. Welcome back. What's going on? Everybody gets a welcome back, especially people who my stream says are first-time chatters. You especially get a welcome back. What's going on? I'm doing okay. It's very hot in my office, but what are you gonna do? I almost always take a shower right after streaming. Zavaris, I'm glad you enjoyed the parlay. It was long. I hope you feel like it was dense. It was long, but I felt it warranted that length. There was a lot to cover in it. So yeah, well, I would be happy to talk about that, sure. Let me break now, and we will talk about making some kind of guided effigy monstrosity when we get back. But yeah, the idea, Resonator is a fun idea. I also like the idea that Resonator and guided effigy, you manipulate multiple different, you know what I mean? Another thing that something I think about a lot as a creator, as an entertainer, is, if people want to do something different on Chroma, the Resonator guided effigy thing, like, that's a lot of micromanagement. But if you're the person who wants that build, like, you probably want a lot of micromanagement, I would imagine. So it kind of makes sense to go for something that's a bit more extreme in the other direction, because why would you be, you don't need something powerful on Chroma, you want something different. So making it like more different, it doesn't seem bad. Normally I would say like, but that's a lot of micromanagement, which like you might like or not, that's fine. But I would predict as a creator that people who want an effigy build probably are into that, So I think that's smart, especially with its augment. Right. I will talk to you all in just a few minutes. I'll hit the head, clean up from the coffee we made before, and then we will continue our journey today. Behold my Twitch archive parlay segment. This is a part of the show where I hit the restroom and pass Zandy here. I'm going to entertain you while my present self is taking a piss. And I'm going to do that by answering questions that you all submitted last week. So we'll see this week. There's one question from, yes. This is from Corvid75. Corvid asks, I want to play other games, and you've told me on streams before that there are other games that you enjoy playing that I would enjoy watching. I guess this is someone who lurks on the stream, but I just can't enjoy anything else. I'm addicted to Warframe. This is the only game that's fun. This is what it says. Literally in the text, it says, other games are literally just bad, period. So, okay, this is good because that's a strong opinion. That means we can respond to that. I would rather have questions like this. Like, I think you're just completely wrong, but you asking it this way is awesome because it means there's really something to respond to here, right? So why do I think you're wrong? Well, this is just my opinion. I don't know if this is true. But what I think is the case is that people who believe that they only like one instance of a thing, I just don't think it's possible for an art form like, video games or, books or something to ever be such something that so few people do, that there could only be one thing in that art form that is doing the things you like. So, and I mean no offense when I say this, it must be the case that you simply don't know exactly what the things that you like about Warframe are. It cannot possibly be true that only Warframe does them. There's no way that the things that you like or would want out of a video game are so specific and that Warframe is doing such specific things that are those specific things you like. Is that possible? I just don't think that's what it is. Okay, maybe that's possible. That what I just said, that sounds possible. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think that in principle, if you could figure out exactly what it was that you liked about Warframe, we could find you a game, probably not me, but everybody here in chat, we could find you a game that would do those things. There isn't no way, but it is extremely unlikely. It is unfathomably unlikely that Warframe is the only game that does this unknown thing that you like. So if it appears that there are no other games that do it, I believe that that means that you do not know what it is that Warframe is doing or the things that it's doing that you really enjoy. And just to be crystal clear, there's really no pejorative here, right? Not that you need my approval, but there's no, I think almost all of us don't know exactly what these things are. I'm not trying to suggest, I know what I like about these games. Well, I kind of do. It's my job to know. But, it's a challenging thing to know that. And so it's no great feat to enjoy something a lot, but be unaware of exactly what it is you like about it. That is, after all, the job of the entertainer, not the audience member, to know what the audience might like. That is not your job as somebody who is consuming a piece of media. It's the job of the person creating the piece of media. So you are not in the business of knowing exactly what it is that you like. Now, this is a problem because of marketing. Because games are marketed toward what the marketing people know about what players think they want, and then the game just doesn't actually deliver on those things because companies have no creative integrity most of the time. Things made by groups, large groups, tend not to deliver, which forces you, the audience member, to know what you like in a way that would be useless to you if the creator, the entertainer, was on your side. When you consume things made by individuals, if those individuals are skilled, you should be able to just enjoy yourself and take them at face value, because the individual has an incentive to do their job well and create something that you might enjoy. So the best solution I can provide, there's no way that I will know exactly what it is you uniquely like about Warframe. I'm not even going to try to figure that out, but here's my suggestion. It may be easier to find other things that do the things you at least think you like about Warframe if you consume things that are made by individuals or small groups, indie games and such, for example. And the reason is not because those things are better in some way or that it's cool that they're made by a small number of people. I mean, that's great. I really admire that. But none of that stuff matters for this topic. The reason is that what the game says it is trying to deliver will be closer to what it actually delivers. So your success rate, if you find a thing, you think this is what I like about, Warframe or some game, and then you apply that. If you apply that to things made by smaller groups of people, your success rate will tend to be higher because those things will be more targeted. They'll just be more targeted. So that's my barely advice. I like to offer some kind of way forward, but I know that for this type of question, the thing I've offered is hopelessly abstract. But I hope you'll forgive me because, again, it's a long road to understand that. I salute your efforts. On with the show. With this level of addiction, we're gonna need a different kind of Warframe patch. Holy crap, Feather. I'm gonna sit down, which is gonna make the stream lag a little bit because of my janky electrical wiring. So hold on. Doop doop doop. Oop. Doop doop. Adjust my seating. My seating. Tips hat. My seating. Excellent, cool. Right. So when we left off, we were talking about making a guided effigy build, and I think the idea of making a guided effigy build that has resonator on it is really cool. And we talked about, you know, manipulating the effigy and the resonator ball to like Pied Piper the enemies into one spot, group them up, and move them into the right place, and then effigy into them. Like that would be cool. Very similar to like somebody mentioned larva before, which this would be similar, but maximum micro. So yeah, we could talk about that. Before we start talking about that, I want to briefly bring up something that I really like when I make these videos, and I know I've noticed that a lot of you don't seem to care about, so I won't dwell on it too much, but it interests me, which is the first thing that I always think of in this situation is, can we make the build we're describing also be this build? I don't want a lot of builds because there are a lot of Warframes. If we have only one build for each Warframe, that's still like 50 builds. I'm never going to actually play them all. We won't have enough time to play them all. So making every build, every loadout, be the most over-engineered piece of crap is like, I want that, you know? I'm more than happy to drop effectiveness from the builds in exchange for like them doing more stuff at the same time, personally. And I know that a lot of you don't feel that way. For you, it's like, if this build is a bit better or has quality of life, versus we get this like janky other thing, why would you even want to do both things at the same time? That's true. Like, that's a good point. Like, indeed. But I do kind of. And the main reason is that I don't want a lot of builds. I want to condense them. And for what it's worth, that mindset creates dense builds that are interesting to discuss, not builds that are a flashy YouTube thumbnail and people get big damage or whatever. But like the build is like 15 minutes of just talking about doing one thing in an edited video. Come on, we spent like 15 minutes talking about that with an unedited video. This is not some kind of get on my level thing. I'm just trying to say, personally, I find it more interesting to make something a bit intricate. What inspires me about the resonator thing, let me just do it and then I'll discuss it. Well, the main thing is that the augment that lets you manipulate resonator, that's an Exilus augment, so you don't need to spend a core mod slot on that. And we can just get rid of Spectral Scream, which is okay because I'm not going to switch the element. Like, me as a player, I'm personally not going to switch the element around. So I don't really mind if we lose Spectral Scream. We'll just take that off. Why not just ensnare? So here's a few things. If you were to use something like ensnare or larva, one of my concerns on this build is that I don't want to have to build range for only that ability. Now, we have to look into guided effigy being affected by range and stuff, but as I recall, it's not, or at least it's not. There's like a minimum, or I remember there being some weirdness with that. We'll have to check on that in a sec. One of the benefits of resonator is that having high duration and low efficiency seems good on resonator. Like, that's fine, although you would want good range. So we're gonna have to check on that, but the idea is it might multitask a bit more. Why not just ensnare? Besides that, no reason you could. That's fine. A lot of these things are just preference. Like, it accomplishes a similar thing, but I just think resonator would be a clean fit for this build. We have stats that might work well with it. I don't know. Let's look at how bad its range is. 5 meters. Okay. But anyway, the fantasy that was being suggested was that you've got your effigy and your resonator, and you can move both of them around to manipulate enemy spacing. And a resonator is still grouping enemies, and then you can throw effigy into the resonator, which might be a fun playstyle to some people. Now, the thing about that, again, is like this is all unnecessary. You could use ensnare or something else, and that in many ways makes as much or more sense. This just isn't worth doing anyway, so it doesn't matter. That's how I feel. So yes, please don't use resonator. That's fine, but it's not like meaningfully better in any way. I don't feel. This is already not accomplishing any new thing for Chroma. I do not think that Chroma has that available, some new thing to accomplish. But that's me. That's the way I'm thinking of it. So Pixel, yeah, like what you're saying is true. It's just like, I don't know. But again, there's a concern about the range. So resonator, the max charm radius, it's based on noise volume, right? It's currently very low. That's not good. We could drop some narrow-minded to give it better range. Let's just try it, because I'm very curious like how bad that will feel. You could drop vitality for range as well. I suppose you could. Right, but the Bastard is the other thing, is that Resonator has an augment that lets you control it, move it at will, and it is an Exilus augment, so that has very little build cost. That's another really good thing. I don't, I don't really care about Handspring. I'm going to put the augment in that slot. I don't currently have room, and the way that that's taking off the mods is all weird. Again, my Forma won't fit like this, but that's fine. So we have a conductor there, and then I would want guided effigy, which would be like this. Could just get rid of adaptation. And then you could put a little range here if you wanted. And just stretch. That's a whole thing. Right, so some stuff. One thing that really appeals to me about this too is like the negative efficiency is quite efficient, from a build perspective. It's good with the whole like brief respite shield thing for Vex armor, and Elemental Ward is a long duration. Resonator has a pretty long duration, and negative efficiency makes Guided Effigy refund more energy. So like Blind Rage is ridiculously efficient on this build, so that's really nice. These things fit well in this build. If it didn't, we could just make a different build. That's fine. But I feel you see how it is really close, right? Like it actually is very similar. I want to get rid of one of the auger mods if that maintains the armor thing. I care about that. If you don't, obviously that's what you take off. These are just bad anyway if you don't care about the like when you cast Vex armor, it gives you enough shields to fully charge itself. If you don't care about that, you obviously just take these off. I do care about that, so I'm trying to think what I want to do. You must be able to get away with taking one off. That would be insane if you literally need both of these. That's nuts. So I guess it's probably going to be Augur Secrets, because I want increased efficiency. How much does that make a difference? Oh, very little though. Yeah, okay, so I'll take up Augur Message. And then you can put Stretch on, which brings the range of Resonator up to 11 meters when it's maxed out, which I think will still happen with like Gunfire, right? And you could take off both Augur mods and just use like Resonator or something if you needed more shields. That's perfectly reasonable too. That would result in like you could put back on Adaptation and Vitality here. I just don't have enough space. Oh, the Augur range mod, that exists. I'm an idiot. Thank you. Augur Reach, surprise. That's amazing. That puts it at about 10 meter. Lol. Thank you, Systax. Turns out there's just an Augur mod that is Stretch. I mean, it's a little worse, but come on. Okay, sweet. Wow, yeah, that's a lot better. So obviously, pretty big quality of life upgrade there. And then you can just still run Umbral Vitality in this slot. Cool. Let's see how that feels. Now, at the moment, with the build currently, unranked adaptation will not let me run our Umbral Vitality, but that's fine. I just want to see how this feels. It doesn't have to work perfectly right now. We're gonna need to test some stuff anyway. Pixel mentioned, you could just cast another ability to get more shields. That's fine. Again, it doesn't actually matter. I'm just telling you, I personally like the convenience of hitting Vex Armor and you get all the shields you need right away. Like, I just like that. It's not particularly necessary. That's very true. Now, if it makes a very small difference, obviously I'm compelled, which it might very well. I guess we'll find out. Because I did take off one auger mod. So we only have one already. And something that I should have made more clear. One thing about Brief Respite, this would be good enough on its own, but it doesn't give you overshields. So it says while overshields are inactive. The idea is that if you have full shields but not overshields, the auger mod set gives you overshields, but this doesn't work. So if you have no shields, then you get enough shields and then extra overshields. And if you have shields, then you get the overshields. Like that's the whole thing. You can't use just Brief Respite and then spam abilities because it doesn't give you overshields. If you're taking damage constantly, it's fine. But this is such a minor thing. I don't want to derail you all with it. If you're not familiar with Resonator and Conductor, let me do that. So you throw out your ball, and on its own, it just has a mind of its own. It does whatever it pleases. It will seek out enemies it hasn't attracted. Now, if you activate it again and direct it somewhere, it will now stay there. It will not move on its own anymore. Once you've directed it one place, it won't move on its own anymore. And then you can direct it wherever you like. As you can see, it moves rather quickly with some weird pathing to the location that you choose. Whoa! Sometimes extremely quickly. Holy crap, wow. And enemies that are attracted by it will follow it to those locations. So if you haven't seen this before, that's what it does. I think this is really cool. It's good, it's fine. But the main thing is just it's quite usable. It does what it does pretty quickly. G Perosa, thank you so much for tuning in. What's going on? Have a good night. It is late where you are. Hope you're having a good one. Yoink. So you'll see now all those enemies it attracted are going to follow it, or they're going to attempt to follow it down there. And you can move them around as you like. And they've been attracted by it, so as my understanding goes, they will now not break free. They're not gonna get out. It's got them, Now, they're not exactly all standing exactly together, but they are vaguely standing in a line, which is good enough, right? If we're going to summon Effigy and then manipulate it, which I messed up, and go, ha, fly. No? I ran out of energy. Okay, classic. Just grab that. But again, they don't have to be all grouped up as long as they're in a line. That's mostly what we're going for here. And then you could just kind of throw it at them. You just kind of click near where they are, and it zooms over and grabs them for you. And again, they're not really all in the same place, but they're all kind of in a line, which is close enough. Why are you not moving? There we go. Yay! Oh! There we go. So that's what that looks like. Now, compared to grouping abilities, one thing I don't like about this is it doesn't hold enemies in place, right? When your effigy, your guided effigy shot, when that hits enemies, it knocks them all over the place, which you don't necessarily want. Or at least in that situation it did, right, previously. Which can be a bit of a pain, right? They're not all grouped up. If you were to use something like Ensnare that holds them still, that would be quite good in this situation. So while the Resonator effigy combo is cute. Like, I think that's really fun. I really like that idea. There is a good reason to use something else. So I hope that helps as a demonstration. If you thought, oh, that sounds like a cool idea I might enjoy, but I don't know about the usability, I hope you found it useful to see, like, that's what those abilities look like. Larva and Ensnare should hold on to enemies just fine. I'm not going to waste all the resources to infuse every single grouping ability, but like you can be confident that Airburst probably won't work for holding them together, and Larva and Ensnare probably will. Yelton. Welton? How am I doing with the pronunciation? Welcome aboard. What's going on? We are playing around with this kind of silly but interesting little addition of Guided Effigy to a more standard Chroma build. And the idea is that we're, at the moment, using Octavia's Resonator with Conductor to gather the enemies up and then group them up so you can hit them with Guided Effigy. And Guided Effigy has this weird thing where it refunds you more energy for each enemy hit, and that scales inversely with efficiency, so you get more energy back if you have less efficiency, which makes it really good with Blind Rage. So it does like 10,000 damage per second in a line, and refunds quite a bit of energy despite us having terrible efficiency, which is weird, but good. I wanted to demonstrate the damage a little bit more, so I'm going to put enemies at a more reasonable level, like you might actually be expecting this build to kill them. I'll plop out my ball. Hit him with my balls, group them up, attract them all. Looks like it's got him. Very nice. Activate Effigy, and we're gonna go pow. Get a whole bunch of energy back. And then you can see how much damage some of the enemies are taking. And how unreliably it's hitting them. We're gonna have to look at range scaling. So you can see it is kind of reliably not knocking them all over the place. But I will say I'm noticing, it's hard to see if you're on like mobile or whatever, but I am noticing it's not very reliably giving me energy back. So I think it is affected by range, which is not good for this build because we dumped range. But we could undump range, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know. So Guided Effigy doesn't say anything about range. Let's check the wiki for at least some idea. Guided Effigy, and see what the wiki has to say. It kind of looks like it's affected by range, but let's get a second opinion. No, it doesn't seem to say anything. And I'll tell you that from my experience using it just now, it feels like the range of this ability is like either like it just is very low, or range does affect it. So this is easy to test. We'll just take off this. The range should now be at least twice as high. If it's not really easy to hit enemies with now, this augment is just bad currently, and we'll have to hope it gets buffed more in the future, because it is not practical to hit enemies with in its current form, unless it's affected by range. So let's find out. Nerthoff, welcome aboard. How you doing today? And Domi, thank you for the follow. Welcome aboard. What's going on? We're playing around with... Oh, that looks pretty affected by range to me. We're playing around with this Chroma Guided Effigy build, and I'm trying to get a handle on how it's affected by range. If it's affected by range, when Chroma charges, when the Effigy charges at enemies. And it kind of looks like it is. Now, I've noticed that it's not very responsive, too. You're probably seeing that. Sometimes I drop the little indicator for where I want it to charge, but it just kind of doesn't move. So my evaluation, and I'm not happy about this evaluation, preliminarily, is that this is still maybe a bit buggy or not fully functional. It doesn't very reliably do this thing. The damage is there. You know, it's a lot of damage. And you could easily soften their armor if that was an issue. We haven't even talked about companions or weapons yet. So the damage is fine, but the problem is that it's not very consistent. It does also seem to be affected by range a little bit to my eye, but that's not very clear. The game doesn't say anything about that. The wiki doesn't say anything about that. It probably is affected by range, but I don't know. I think it's perfectly reasonable if that sounds fun to you, but does it seem like really good to me? No, unfortunately. And I'm gonna go back to what I had. Yeah, I'm not going to try with an Exodius hunt stick for grouping because that doesn't address any of the problems I just described, and we could just test everything forever all day, but we only have 2 hours to do these, so I hope you'll forgive me. I'm not going to test that. But it would be good to group enemies up and then charge it into them. It's just at the end of the day, that's still not going to be... I mean, and then you're even attacking with a weapon. Like, you can do so much damage if you just kill them with a weapon on Chroma. But again, I know, like, the main point of discussing this is some players may simply want to play Chroma and not kill them with weapons. They want to use effigy. And this does do pretty good damage. So again, like, the argument, of course, is just use a gun, but the people who care about this augment don't find that compelling, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with simply wanting to use this. I do feel, though, that if our solution is still using a weapon, that kind of doesn't accomplish anything. I don't know. So, all right, I've griped a lot and rejected a lot of perfectly reasonable ideas from the innocent chat. So what's your idea, Zandy? What's so good about the thing you want to do? And I don't know. I really don't. What do I want on my Chroma that is just going to do boring old damage? Chroma does seem to be a frame that, for me, on my account, Chroma is going to be my go-to just do damage Warframe. Or, like, I often use Chroma for we'll come back to the helmet system in a minute. We often use Chroma for open world bosses. Like Prophet Taker. And in that evaluation, in that situation, Chroma is a really good fit. You know, you have the damage and the survivability, and then doubling the credits is like weirdly pretty good in Prophet Taker. You put the effigy on Prophet Taker's butt, and then you get more credits. That is a weird but good fit. And again, my argument, my evaluation, is that in a game like Warframe, where there's like 50 Warframes, if you're going to make individual builds for each of them, like, they can be good for a very specific thing because you have 50 of them. And some of these frames we have made multiple builds for at the end of the day. Once these streams have ended, we have not always only had one build. There have been some frames already where even me, picky man Zandy, even I have occasionally settled on multiple builds for a frame already, and we've only been through a few. So there's nothing wrong with the frame, you know, Chroma's niche being, I just want a pile of damage to kill an open world boss. That's perfectly fine. Now, if it's going to be stuff like Prophet Taker, I do think that means that the heavy weapon that we pick might matter quite a bit, because that sounds like the primary place I'm going to be using him, right? So I would like to talk about that a little. I'm going to catch back up on chat. Feather, you said, will you be seeing how this feels against open world bosses as well as regular gameplay? Usually wouldn't be useful, but since you're trying to condense the frame's uses into one build, makes sense to test if you can do that content without changing builds. Yeah, so if I had felt like the guided effigy build with Resonator was pretty good, or at least functional, even if it's not like really accomplishing much over this just shooting things, then I would be interested in that. I would want to go take that slightly weakened, straightforward damage build and do like Prophet Taker just to see, like, can you really just make one build, or does it feel like that small drop in efficiency feels meaningful against like the stuff I'm actually going to use Chroma for? Because I didn't really feel like that was that functional, I'm not too worried about that. I've used Chroma against Prophet Taker many, many times, but I would be interested in testing that, yes. Have you tried parasitic armor on him? Why? It would only give him a bunch of armor, and he already has Vex armor, which does that, and give him a bunch of damage. We'll pull up parasitic armor. It's an interesting ability. probably not going to be a whole lot of, or practically any, Chroma gameplay in this stream, since there isn't a lot to demonstrate if we're just the weapon damage build. But I do have a few other helmet abilities I want to talk about, and we may demonstrate them. Parasitic armor. If you're not familiar, this sacrifices shields to reinforce armor. Now, this is already what Vex armor does, so I don't see any reason to use this. Is there a reason you were particularly interested? I don't mean to shut down the idea. I just feel like this is like half of Vex armor, but sort of worse. It'd stop the shield gate from constantly reforming so that you've got a faster Vex armor damage buff. Oh, interesting, I see. So if you just want to get the damage buff on Vex armor, this could be like a weird hack for that. That's interesting. Will the damage to shields increase the percent on Vex armor? Oh, you mean like just parasitic armor sacrificing shields like charge Vex armor shield portion? Probably not. That's interesting. I would test that if I, again, felt like that was accomplishing a lot. I don't want to spend, well, it's not that many resources. Do you really want to know? Anyway. It's also like, why is Hildren there? Doesn't armor not work on shields? Yeah, who knows what this example is meant to demonstrate. Would you like to see if parasitic armor charges Vex armor? It doesn't cost that much to test that. I'll do that if that would make you happy. Sure. But what I was looking into really is like, this is, what do you buy the frame that has everything? We're gonna go into some weirdo stuff. That's what I'm interested in doing. Or like, I think there's some merit to bringing like a healing ability for reasons I'll talk about. But yeah, let's quickly check this sacrificial armor thing people are interested in. Parasitic armor, excuse me. Kani, excuse me. I've always thought Chroma is really similar to Rhino in that they're both tanky and buff their gun damage while having basically no ability damage. I wonder if you could actually build Chroma in a way that doesn't focus on those things. We just talked about that for 2 hours. I think Spectral Scream has been buffed rather significantly and does do pretty okay damage at the moment. But it's not better in any meaningful way than shooting enemies. It's just good too, if you would like simply enjoy using it. Which, for what it's worth, I don't think that's a bad direction. Guided Effigy does very good damage when it hits enemies. I just find it clunky to use. And again, it is still inferior to simply attacking enemies with your guns. But it's adequate, you know? And there's 2 questions here, right? Like, does the player want what they feel is the best or among the most powerful approaches, or do they want something that is simply a playstyle they enjoy and they don't much care as long as it kills the enemies? And if it's the latter question, I think that Chroma is now at the point where there isn't really any reason why you couldn't use Chroma's abilities and kill enemies at a lot of levels of play, but the Steel Path, I don't know, like that will be a chunk. So that's my 2 cents, but we did just spend the whole stream talking about that, so forgive me. I can't give a better summary than that, boss, but I will quickly test this parasitic armor thing for people. So we'll activate Vex armor. Oh. So it worked. Yeah. Oh, yeah, and then it disables your armor for a while. Interesting. Oh, that's weird. That's kind of cool. I don't hate that. Yeah, okay. All right. So yeah, chat, if you were wondering, yes, it does charge Scorn, so you do get your shield, your armor. You lose shields, which does give you armor from Vex Armor's Scorn. And then I didn't know that Parasitic Armor actually disables even having shields while it's active. I did not know that. But it does. Which means that works. So if you're interested in that, that's a thing you can do. That's cool. Today I learned about that. As Invasions? As Invasions, is that right? Thanks for the raid. How you doing today? What's up? We are at the tail end of a stream talking about Chroma. We have been doing a series of build discussions about every Warframe in the game. I'm going alphabetically, and I'm skipping frames that haven't been primed, not because the prime makes a big difference, just because I want to customize my frame once and then not, you know, mod them again once I, you know. So we're on Chroma now. It's been like a month or so. And I don't feel there is a whole lot that I'm excited about anyway on Chroma. I was really interested when we talked about Guided Effigy to at least see, you know, like, how does it feel? I don't think it feels very good. I think it's kind of finicky. I wish it was not so, but I think it is. So that's how that's gone. That being said, there was an interesting question in chat. If you use Vex armor and then you use parasitic armor, when that drains your shields, does that charge Scorn, which is Vex armor's thing where you lose shields and gain armor? And it does. It also disables your shields, so shield gating won't interrupt you gaining damage from Vex armor when you take damage to your health, which I don't think is that exciting, but it is kind of interesting that there's no denying that has utility. There would be fights where that would be useful. So yeah, like, that's interesting. Nothing wrong with that. I can't claim credit for that idea. My lovely community claims credit for that idea. Not that that has anything to do with me. No, I'm just being silly. But yeah, that was my loverly community coming up with that. That's cool. A nice little trick that is definitely meaningful. A lot of the time, Chroma is so tanky, like, you're not gonna die, but you're just not charging as much damage as you would. You know, you would rather take more damage. So in that way, sacrificial armor is actually kind of meaningful, which is weird. The armor it gains you really isn't, but just turning off your shields is weirdly kind of useful in this case, which is interesting. That's interesting. I will put that in my notes. Sacrificial armor does charge Scorn and disables shields, leading to more Vex armor damage faster. You are not excessively tanky because you've disabled shield gating. But again, the additional armor maybe not particularly meaningful when you already have so much. And adaptation. Yeah. How much armor is it? Conversion percent. Oh, it's, yeah, right. It's based on your shields, and then you get a flat amount. So if you're cutting away, it was often like 500 shields with my overshields from the Augur mods. So you're getting 300% of that. So it's like 1500 armor. And with Vex armor fully charged, with Scorn fully charged, you already have 1000% of your base armor, which is 4000. So 1500 more armor sounds good, but it actually isn't. It's not terrible, I guess, but it doesn't really do anything. But parasitic armor does absolutely still help you charge Vex armor's damage portion by disabling shield gating. And parasitic armor is not like some bad ability in general. I just don't think that Chroma cares about getting more armor when you have this much more. That just doesn't actually do that much. Although, yeah, Evasion says you could use Electricity Elemental Ward to get even more shields, which would give you a lot more armor that way. Again, I don't think Chroma benefits from that much, but you would absolutely get a massively increased armor buff. That would put it up to like 3 or 4 or 5,000 more armor on top of you already have like 4,000 armor, which is crazy and not mathematically a lot, but it is sure a hell of a lot of armor, isn't it? I saw a few follows too. Vision, thank you for the raid. I'm not acquainted with you. Let me briefly give you a little shout out. Folks, our glorious host, one of a few from this evening. There's been a lot of raids today. Our glorious host. Take a gander if you like. And I missed Void and Solidor Prime. Thank you for the follows. Welcome aboard. How you doing today? If you like this kind of discussion, I do this every week. I'm not going to do it when patches come out because I know you're all excited about the new stuff. We'll just focus on talking about that. That's fine. So next week I'll be streaming this time, but we'll probably just be playing. But normally every time this week, every Thursday, we start about 2 hours ago, I'm doing this. So it won't be next week. The week after next, we're going to move on to Ember. Ember will be a time, won't she? Oh, there are some things to say, aren't there? Ooh, kind of the opposite of Chroma, really, where I don't think there's a lot of obvious things to talk about Ember. So I've personally been looking forward to Ember. For me, a lot of the fun of these, right, is like I get to crowdsource a bunch of interesting ideas for a frame or learn things about the frame that even if I don't like I just didn't know about, like the Zada's Whisper cold elemental ward thing. I don't think that's very meaningful for my way of playing the game most of the time, but I want to know it exists, like that's interesting. It's not significant to me as a player, to my account, but that doesn't matter. It's just interesting. I'm not going to use half these builds anyway. I'm doing this because I like making builds. So thank you all for telling me about that. Thank you for talking about builds with me today. I'm doing this not necessarily because it's useful, but because I like it. Although I am trying to make builds that I am likely to find useful. So if you have ideas about what you'd want to put on Ember, save them up, and in about 2 weeks, this time in 2 weeks, we will be doing that. And if you want archives of these, I do have those on another channel. There will also be one for this stream with timestamps. I think that's what I have to say. Yeah. Folks, I gotta go have dinner. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Just a very brief bit of housekeeping. I normally stream tomorrow and also on Sunday, and I will not be streaming tomorrow. I'm taking a bit of a break. I have some stuff going on elsewhere in my work, running all my other channels, the 3 YouTube channels that I need to focus on, and I would also like a little bit of a rest from streaming. I've had a lot of streaming lately, and I like that. I do it because I like it, but I need tomorrow. So we're not going to stream tomorrow. Now, I know that people who've been watching regularly, you've been wondering what is going to be in the Friday slot. Like every Thursday, we're doing the Warframe thing. And then on Sundays, we've been doing the Genshin Impact build stuff. Those are great. Those are filling their roles. Lots of stuff to talk about every week with the Warframe framework thing. And Genshin Impact has tons of build stuff to talk about, to chew on. But we haven't really had like a core Friday game. Now, I was playing Hades for a while, which is really good for discussing on streams, but I've kind of wanted something a bit different for a while. I really like Hades. I'm not really tired of it, but I have been wanting to explore, and I don't know yet. I really don't know, to be honest with you. So the week after next, we'll probably play Hades on Friday, because I've been wanting to come back to that a little bit, but I would like to find something new as well. So that's that. So no stream as normal tomorrow, but we do normally stream tomorrow. Be here as normal on Sunday. Next week, no framework. We'll be just playing the update or just the game in general. But in 2 weeks, this time in 2 weeks, we're doing the Ember framework. So I'll talk to you all then. Looking forward to your ideas. Have a good night.